Now for update number 3, this is actually going to be in relation to our previous video on COVID-19, and is going to be discussing Dr. Jones, some of the information that Dr. Jones mentioned in that video. Now, Dr. Jones is the lead director that's been appointed to oversee the outbreak of the Corona-19 in China, and so he's kind of the lead guy there. And in the previous video, we discussed a video that Dr. Jones did where he was going over some of the preliminary data that they have regarding COVID-19 and those who've actually contracted the virus. And so up on the screen right now, you're going to see a table that Dr. Jones is talking about some elevated he's talking about hypersecretion of mucus in the lungs in this table. And this is what's been kind of exhibited in some of these patients, is that they have elevated expressions of pathways that are for regulating mucus secretion in our lungs. And as you can actually see on the table, you have MUC1 and MUC5AC, and you can see for the healthy control, they have lower levels for COPD patients, and then for those who have COVID-19, they have elevated levels of this expressions of these particular pathways that regulate mucus secretion. So he's just discussing this in the video and saying this is problematic. This elevated hypersecretion of mucus in the lungs that's being taken place in patients, or is being exhibited in patients. And so I did some digging through some of the literature, and actually what we see is that hydrogen can actually help, potentially help in this regard. Now, these are animal models, but I do have, it also seems like these are translating well into human studies, as human studies also. But here, this is the title for a study. We're using hydrogen-rich solution or hydrogen-rich saline. It says hydrogen-rich saline, it inhibits tobacco smoke-induced chronic obstruction pulmonary disease by alleviating airway inflammation and mucus hypersecretion in rats. And in particular, a quote from this study says this, that hydrogen saline downregulated MUC5 AC levels. And it also says here on the conclusion of the abstract, it says that in conclusion, these results suggest that administration of hydrogen-rich saline exhibited significant protective effects on chronic obstructive pulmonary disease through alleviating inflammation, reducing oxidative stress, and lessening mucus hypersecretion in tobacco smoke-induced chronic obstructive pulmonary disease in rats. And this is not the only study that mentions this. There's another study that's titled Hydrogen Gas Inhalation Protects Against Cigarette Smoke-Induced COPD Development in Mice. There's actually a quote from this study that actually shows that hydrogen inhalation was able to attenuate the effects or the negative effects of the cigarette smoke, but it was also able to decrease the levels of these pathways that regulate mucus hypersecretion. And in that quote, it says, these results demonstrate that H2 inhalation attenuates CS-induced airway inflammation and mucus hypersecretion in COPD mice. Now, that's actually rather important because, like I said, stated in the previous video, Dr. Jones mentioned that this is quite problematic and can be very damaging for those who've contracted the virus. And so knowing that hydrogen has the potential to downregulate this mucus hypersecretion could possibly lead to increased survival from those who have contracted the COVID-19 that have a severe case of it with this elevated mucus hypersecretion. Now, I wanted to mention a human study as well. And this is the title of it. It says Protective Effects of Hydrogen on the Lung of Sanitation Workers Exposed to Haze. And in that study, it actually concluded that that hydrogen gas was able to alleviate the airways and oxidative stress of these sanitation workers who was exposed to air pollution. And I also mentioned that that hydrogen had a significant inhibitory effect on levels of systemic inflammation. Importantly, inhalation of hydrogen could improve respiratory symptoms such as coughing or such as cough. So not only does hydrogen seem to be having this positive effect on the lungs in animal models, but it does seem to have positive effect on the lungs possibly in human models as well. And this is also obviously being seen in China right now with their team that's actually administering hydrogen. All right, now update number 4. Now I received this article from another colleague of mine it was actually shared to him, and both of us work in this industry of the therapeutic hydrogen industry, and so I thought it would be important to share with you guys some of the insights that came from this article and how it can relate to hydrogen. Now, this update is in regard to the cytokine storm that is actually being seen in these COVID-19 patients. And so there's an actual article that'll be listed in the description. You can go read, and it's discussing what this is and pretty much what it means for those patients that contracted the virus and how it's kind of difficult. It's difficult to treat. So now the title of the article is actually called "The Coronavirus Turns Deadly When It Leads to Cytokine Storm. Identifying this immune response is key to patients' survival." Report. So a quote from the article I think is important to kind of help kind of define what this cytokine storm is. It states, "For one thing, a new study indicates that COVID-19 triggers in some people something called a cytokine storm, where one's own immune system goes berserk. This virus-activated immune response can be deadly, causing severe respiratory distress and subsequent shutdown of multiple organs." And so cytokines are just communicating. Cytokines are communicating proteins or inflammatory mediators, and so they allow they are needed for proper inflammatory response of our bodies and to induce inflammation, as well as their anti-inflammatory cytokines that can help to reduce inflammation in our bodies. And so it appears that the cytokine storm our lungs can become flooded with cytokines, these inflammatory mediators, and can be a significant problem. Like it quoted, causing shutdown of multiple organs. And so it seems that COVID-19 or some of these patients' immune response to COVID-19 can actually be something that can lead to their death. Another quote from this article I think was very important was in regards to trying to treat the cytokine storm that is induced by our own immune system's activation to the virus. Now, to address the second quote, it actually discusses the fact that this cytokine storm syndrome can actually be difficult to treat once it's actually identified, and can be a challenge for those physicians who's actually trying to treat it. They do have immunosuppressant agents and that are broad spectrum, that are readily available across the world. But for a person who's severely ill with this going on, to use this agent to suppress the immune system can be a difficult decision for a doctor. Now, this is where I believe hydrogen actually comes in, because hydrogen, thus far, we know has no known cytotoxic effects or has no adverse effects. But it's also been demonstrated that hydrogen can have regulatory effects on our immune system, as well as being able to have the ability to downregulate pro-inflammatory cytokines and upregulate anti-inflammatory cytokines. And to be able to do this in a broad spectrum of leukocytes or white blood cells. And so I have a few quotes from a few overview articles actually discussing this potential effect of hydrogen, and it is something that is mentioned by the researcher. Was that she actually talks about how hydrogen can potentially address the cytokine storm as well because of its ability to regulate these pro-inflammatory mediators. But the articles that I'm actually mentioning is the title for one is molecular hydrogen, a preventative and therapeutic medical gas for various diseases. And it discusses how it downregulates the expressions of pro-inflammatory and inflammatory cytokines, and goes to list some of them out, like tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin 6, these different cytokines that can be damaging if they're out of their if they can be damaging on our body if they're out of homeostasis, pretty much. And so another one, another article that also mentions this effect of hydrogen is its title is Anti-Inflammatory and Anti-Tumor Action of Hydrogen via reactive oxygen species. And in this article, it actually mentions the same thing. That H2 has been shown to decrease the expression of the number of pro-inflammatory factors, including tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin 6, among others, NF-kappa B, these different pro-inflammatory cytokines, that if they're out of their, if they're being overly expressed, can be damaging. And these are our updates that we want to bring for you guys. I believe that they're all promising and exciting. It's great to know that different researchers around the world are actually talking about hydrogen therapy or hydrogen as a possible therapy for COVID-19, and that this hydrogen inhalation and some of the preliminary stuff that's coming out of China is actually promising, that actually might be benefiting these patients, and that other countries should actually implement this as a possible therapy.